The rainforest breathes differently at dawn. Mist clings to leaves like secrets waiting to be whispered, and the canopy, that impossible ceiling of green stretching 50 meters overhead, hums with life invisible from below. Manuel had walked these trails for 12 years, leading tourists through Costa Rica's Monteverde cloud forest, and he thought he'd seen everything: the resplendent quetzals with their impossible tail feathers, the glass frogs so transparent you could count their heartbeats, the jaguars that moved like smoke between trees, but he'd never seen anything quite like what happened that Tuesday morning. His group had stopped near a strangler fig, one of those patient assassins that spends decades wrapping itself around a host tree until the original disappears entirely, leaving only the hollow architecture of the killer. He was explaining this slow violence, this arboreal murder that takes a human lifetime to complete, when something small and brown tumbled past his peripheral vision. Not fell, tumbled. There's a difference in the physics of it. The way the small body rotated through space, limbs splayed in a pattern that spoke of complete helplessness rather than the controlled descent of a creature used to heights. It hit a branch 15 meters up, a sound like a hand slapping water, and tumbled again. Another branch, another small collision, then the forest floor, where it landed in a patch of decomposing leaves with barely any sound at all. The tourists gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Manuel was already moving, his body reacting before his mind caught up, because in that first second, he'd registered something his conscious brain hadn't yet processed. The shape was wrong for a monkey, too slow for a bird, and moving with the terrible limpness of something very young or very hurt. He reached the spot where it landed and dropped to his knees. The creature was the size of his palm, covered in fur, the color of dry earth, with a face that looked perpetually surprised by its own existence. A three-toed sloth, infant, maybe 3 weeks old. Its eyes, huge and dark and already filling with a confusion that looked almost human, blinked slowly up at him. If you found yourself caring about creatures that can't speak for themselves, you found your people here. And if this moment has already shifted something in you, even slightly, leave your thoughts below. Every perspective shared becomes part of how we understand our responsibility to the vulnerable. Manuel had a choice to make, and he had maybe 60 seconds to make it. The protocol was clear. He'd been trained by biologists, certified guides, wildlife rehabilitation experts. You don't touch. You observe. You document. You call the authorities. The forest has its own systems, its own brutal logic of survival. Interfering with that logic, even with the best intentions, often does more harm than good. A mother sloth might reject an infant that smells of human hands. A rescue attempt might separate families that are trying to reunite. Nature is not sentimental, and rescuers who impose their sentimentality onto it often create the very tragedies they're trying to prevent. But the sloth was barely breathing. Its tiny chest rose and fell with a stuttering rhythm that reminded Manuel of an engine trying to start. One of its arms hung at an angle that made his own shoulder ache in sympathy. And when he looked up through the canopy layers, trying to spot a mother sloth, trying to see any sign of where this baby had come from, he saw only the ordinary chaos of the forest. A howler monkey troop moving through branches 30 meters up. A toucan that observed the drama below, with the disinterest of someone who'd seen this story before. His tourists were silent now, waiting. The woman who'd gasped earlier had tears running down her face, though whether from sadness or the helpless recognition of a choice impossible to make, he couldn't tell. The baby sloth made a sound, not quite a cry. Sloths don't vocalize much, especially the three-toed species, but a kind of wheeze, a mechanical protest from lungs that had been compressed by impact. Its tiny claws, already curved and sharp, designed for a life spent hanging from branches, flexed once, grasping at nothing but air. Manuel thought about his training. About the ranger he'd called 3 months ago when he'd found an injured coati, only to be told there were no rehabilitation centers within 2 hours, no vets who specialized in wildlife, no resources available for a single animal when the entire forest was teetering on the edge of a drought. He thought about the baby tapir he'd found last year, already dead when he reached it, its mother standing nearby with an expression animals aren't supposed to be capable of making. He thought about his daughter, who was 7, who had drawn a sloth on her bedroom wall with crayons and marker, its smile too wide, its eyes too bright, its existence in her imagination uncomplicated by the reality of fragile bones and questionable survival rates. Then he made a decision that would change the next 72 hours of his life, and possibly save one that would last another 30 years. He took off his outer shirt, a lightweight hiking shirt that still smelled of the detergent his wife used, and gently, with movements slower than he'd ever attempted, lifted the sloth. It weighed almost nothing, maybe 200 grams, the weight of a coffee mug, the weight of something that shouldn't exist separately from its mother, that was designed by evolution to spend its first months clinging to her fur, learning the slow art of being a sloth through osmosis and imitation. The baby didn't struggle. Either it was too injured, too young to understand fear, or, and this was the thought that would keep Manuel awake that night, it recognized, on some level below instinct, that this was help, that these strange hands were trying. He wrapped the sloth carefully in his shirt, creating a makeshift sling that mimicked the secure feeling of mother's fur. The baby's breathing didn't improve, but it didn't get worse either. Its eyes remained open, tracking Manuel's face with that unnerving sloth focus that makes them look perpetually stoned or deeply philosophical. "I have to go," he told his tour group. His voice came out rougher than intended. "There's a rehabilitation specialist 2 hours from here. I'm sorry, but I have to try." The tourists didn't argue. The crying woman nodded so vigorously he thought her neck might hurt. A man Manuel recognized as a surgeon from Toronto stepped forward. "I have a rental car," he said. "I'll drive you, faster than calling." They moved through the forest at a pace that would have been comical in any other context. Manuel, who normally moved through these trails with the contemplative slowness of the sloths themselves, now practically running, cradling the shirt bundle against his chest. The surgeon, whose name was David, jogging beside him with car keys already out. The rest of the group following, their expensive cameras forgotten, their scheduled butterfly garden visit abandoned. The rehabilitation center was called Slothville, run by a woman named Carmen who'd spent 30 years studying the metabolic mysteries of animals that move so slowly they grew algae on their fur. Manuel had visited once before, bringing a group to see her work, and he remembered thinking her facility looked less like a clinic and more like a meditation retreat, all bamboo structures and hanging gardens and an atmosphere of enforced calm. He called from the parking lot. Carmen answered on the first ring, her voice carrying that particular kind of weariness that comes from caring too much about too many fragile things. "It fell," Manuel said, skipping greetings. "Baby 3-toed. Maybe 3 weeks. Breathing is weak. One arm is wrong. I have it." A pause. He could hear her making calculations, survival odds, resource allocation, the brutal triage of wildlife medicine. "Bring it," she said finally. Quickly. The drive took 90 minutes, not 2 hours. David drove like someone who understood that speed could save lives, but recklessness would end them. Manuel sat in the passenger seat, holding the bundle, checking every 30 seconds that the tiny chest was still rising, falling, rising again. The sloth's eyes stayed open the entire time, watching him with an intensity that felt like accusation or trust or both. Halfway there, it made that sound again, the wheeze. Its mouth opened slightly, and Manuel saw the beginning of teeth, small, dull, designed for a lifetime of chewing leaves so slowly that the action is more meditation than eating. He found himself talking to it, saying things that made no sense, promises he had no authority to make, assurances about a future he couldn't guarantee. "You're going to climb again," he whispered. "You're going to grow algae in your fur. You're going to move so slowly that photographers will give up waiting for you to do something interesting." The sloth blinked, slowly, the way sloths do everything. Carmen met them at the entrance, already gloved, already moving into assessment mode. She was 60, with hands that had held thousands of injured animals and eyes that had seen most of them die. She took the bundle from Manuel with the gentleness of someone handling live explosives. "Good," she said, which was the closest she came to praise. "You did good bringing it." She disappeared into the examination room. David and Manuel stood in the waiting area, which was decorated with photos of graduated sloths, animals that had been injured or orphaned, rehabilitated, released. Success stories. Though Carmen had told him once that for every photo on the wall, there were 3 animals that didn't make it. The ones they buried in the garden. The ones whose stories ended with quiet euthanasia and necessary mercy. 20 minutes passed. 40. Manuel texted his wife, telling her he'd be late. David called his hotel, extending his checkout. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They were 2 men who'd started their day expecting nothing more complicated than bird watching, now sitting in a rehabilitation center, waiting to hear if their intervention had been salvation or just a prolonged way of dying. Carmen emerged with an expression Manuel couldn't read. Fractured humerus, she said. Bruised lung, mild dehydration, but young enough that the bones will heal if we immobilize correctly. Strong enough that the lung should recover with rest and monitoring. Manuel felt something in his chest release. It'll live? Maybe. Carmen never dealt in certainties. 70% chance if we can keep it stable through tonight. 50% chance we can successfully reunite it with its mother if we find her. 20% chance it survives to adulthood even with perfect care. But maybe, yes, maybe was enough. Maybe was everything. Carmen let them see the sloth before they left. It was in an incubator, a setup that looked absurdly high-tech for such a prehistoric-looking creature. The tiny arm was wrapped in what looked like doll-sized casting material. An IV line ran to its leg, delivering fluids. Its eyes were closed now, finally, and in sleep, it looked even more impossible. Like something a child would draw if you told them to imagine a creature made entirely of gentleness and bad survival strategies. "It's a female," Carmen said. "We'll name her Alba. It means dawn." "Because we found her at dawn," Manuel said. "Because she gets a new beginning," Carmen corrected. Over the next 3 days, Manuel visited twice more. David went back to Toronto but sent regular emails asking for updates, along with a donation large enough to fund Alba's care for 6 months. Carmen reported that Alba was eating mashed hibiscus leaves mixed with specialized formula, that she was gripping with her good arm, her claws wrapping around cloth with the instinctive certainty of something that knew, even this young, that holding on was the whole point of being a sloth. They never found the mother. Carmen spent hours with binoculars, scanning the canopy near where Alba fell. But either the mother had moved on, which sloths rarely do, their territories measured in just a few trees, or she'd been dead before the baby fell. Predator. Disease. The casual cruelties that keep rainforest populations in balance. After 8 weeks, Alba's arm had healed. After 12, she was climbing the practice structures Carmen had built, branches wrapped in burlap, hanging at safe heights, where a fall meant landing on foam, not forest floor. She moved with the characteristic sloth slowness, each motion so deliberate it looked choreographed. But she moved. She climbed. She survived. At 6 months, Carmen released her. Not in the wild, Alba would never have the skills learned from a mother, the knowledge of which trees flowered when, which leaves were safe, how to navigate a world that moved at speeds she wasn't designed for, but in a protected forest corridor, where researchers monitored her, where threats were managed, where her slow life could unfold at its own patient pace. Manuel was there for the release. He watched Alba grip the first real branch of her new life, a cecropia tree, Sloth's favorite, its leaves like giant hands. She looked back once. Her eyes had that same surprised expression, that permanent appearance of mild confusion with her own existence. Then she climbed. Slowly. So slowly you could convince yourself she wasn't moving at all unless you looked away and back again. Think she remembers? David had flown back for this, standing beside Manuel, both of them craning their necks to watch a creature the size of a small cat move 6 inches up a tree trunk. "No," Carmen said. She was taking notes, documenting everything. "Their brains aren't wired for memory like ours. She doesn't remember falling, doesn't remember pain or fear or hands that caught her. Then what does she remember?" Manuel asked. Carmen lowered her binoculars, smiled. "That the world is something you can grip, that even when everything fails there's always another branch. That slowness isn't weakness, it's a different kind of wisdom." Alba reached a fork in the branch and paused. For several minutes she didn't move at all, and Manuel thought maybe this was it. Maybe she was stuck. Maybe all the rehabilitation couldn't overcome what she'd lost by falling. But then her arm extended, the one that had been broken, that had healed in Carmen's clinic, that had learned to grip again through patient repetition. She pulled herself up, found her new branch, settled into the leaves. From the ground, she was already almost invisible, just another shape in the canopy's green chaos, another small life doing what small lives do, holding on, moving forward, surviving against odds that would make a statistician weep. The forest doesn't keep records of these moments. There's no database of second chances, no archive of falls that didn't end in death. The trees remember nothing. The moss doesn't care. Evolution itself is indifferent to individual survival, concerned only with the species-level math of enough surviving to breed. But Manuel remembered. David remembered. Carmen would add Alba's photo to her wall. One more success in a career measured by moments just like this, where intervention and luck and stubborn hope converged into something fragile called survival. Stories like this exist in every forest, every ocean, every ecosystem where humans have decided that individual lives matter even when nature suggests they don't, where we impose our sentiment onto a world that operates on different logic, where we choose to catch what falls, to heal what breaks, to give second chances to creatures that evolution designed for first chances only. If these moments resonate with you, these small rebellions against indifference, there are countless more waiting to be witnessed. Stay for them. And if Alba's story changed how you see falling or catching or the distance between those two things, share that shift. Your words add depth to these narratives. Help us understand why we reach out when reaching out makes no evolutionary sense. What did this leave with you? What will you carry forward from a fall that ended differently than it should have?